Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for Addressing Risk Factors for Youth Substance Misuse on the Road to Prevention Success with Chris Gabrielson. This presentation was prepared for the Great Lakes PTTC under a cooperative agreement from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or SAMHSA. The opinions expressed in this webinar are the views of the speakers and do not reflect the official position of the Department of Health and Human Services. A few housekeeping items I want to share with you. If you have technical issues, please individually message me, Rebecca Buller, or Jen Winslow in the chat section at the bottom of your screen. If you have questions, please post those in the Q&A section, which is also at the bottom of your screen. It's important that you do that because we have a lot of participants this morning. We may lose things in the chat as it scrolls by. So if you have a question, please put it in the Q&A section. For captions, if that is something that would be helpful to you, use the live transcript option at the bottom of your Zoom toolbar by selecting live transcript. AI note takers are not allowed. If we see that you're using an AI note taker, we will ask you to disengage, and if you do not, we will remove you from the Zoom room. Certificates of attendance will be sent out via email to all those who attended the full session. And now I'm going to turn things over to Chris Gabrielson, who is the co-director of the Great Lakes Prevention Technology Transfer Center.
Thanks so much, Rebecca. Welcome, everybody. It's great to have you here. I'm so excited to walk you through more information around risk factors because I feel like this is a key piece of knowledge that substance misuse prevention professionals must know and understand and really be thoroughly versed on. So I am pleased that you all chose to spend the next hour and a half with me today. And here is our path for today. We are first going to talk about what are risk factors and why is it important that we look at those? So an introductory piece to that. Then we are going to go ahead and go into looking at each individual risk factor to make sure there's clear understanding of what those risk factors are. And we're going to finish with, okay, now that we have this information, how are we going to put it into action? Hopefully you all received then saw the email that Rebecca sent with the link to the participant workbook. If you do have that participant workbook, can you go ahead and click a reaction? I'm seeing there's some thumbs up. If you've gotten it, so good. I'm seeing some folks are saying, lots of folks. There we go. All right, that's great to see. If you have not seen it yet, in the chat, we are going to put a link to the website page where you can download the workbook. Highly recommend that you download it. If you have access to a printer to print it out to follow along, that would be great. Or if you can have it up on a screen to refer to, that would be great. All right, very good. And feel free, we are a large group today. We're already over 200 people. So feel free to use reactions as we're going along. That's a way for me to easily understand or get a gauge on how folks are doing. So feel free to use those reactions. All right, a little warning. You've got some pop quizzes coming your way today. I have 5 pop quizzes for you. So if you are so willing, you can join in. Those will be done through the polls through Zoom. And so at different parts, after each section, I'll give you a pop quiz to see how good of a job I have done in conveying the information to you all. All right, so let's jump into this introductory piece. If you've been on any of the webinars that I have done recently or in the last few years, I always like to start with making sure that we have a common understanding of when I say the word definition, when I say the word prevention, we are defining it in the same way. So when I'm talking about prevention today, I'm talking about primary prevention, which can be seen in many other areas of our life. For example, most of us probably have antivirus software on our computer. Antivirus software prevents viruses from getting to our computer. It doesn't take care of them if you get it into your computer, prevents it from happening. Lighthouses prevent shipwrecks. They don't take care of the ships after they've wrecked, but they're helping prevent those shipwrecks. Similarly, sunscreen prevents sunburns, and immunizations prevent diseases. So as we're talking today, this is the primary prevention of preventing things from happening in the first place is the kind of prevention that I'm going to be talking about today. So here's another way of saying this. This is a definition from SAMHSA, Center for the Substance Abuse Prevention. The proactive process of empowering individuals and systems to meet the challenges of life events and transitions by creating and reinforcing conditions that promote healthy behaviors and lifestyles. Kind of a mouthful, but there's a lot of key words in here that are essential to this definition. In the chat, go ahead and put, what do you think some of those key words are from this definition? What are some of the things that you think are like, oh yeah, that stands out? Yep, empower, proactive. So we're doing something before it ever happens. Systems, yes, we're looking at changing systems, absolutely. And yep, a lot of empowering and oh boy, you guys are going fast. I love it. Yep, you're catching a lot of those keywords. Yep, healthy behaviors, that we're looking at healthy behaviors and lifestyles. We're looking to meet the challenges of life events and transitions. So very good job. You've got it. And we'll be coming back to this definition just shortly. So the question becomes, if we want to prevent things from happening, we need to know what to do and how to do it, right? It can be easy to just jump into things. We can do our needs assessment within our communities. The first step, the SPIF, the Strategic Prevention Framework. We can identify what problems exist in our community, but just identifying what problems exist does not give us a roadmap to how to do it and what we should do. What is often done when people get to the stage of identifying we have a problem within our community, it's vaping, it is opioid misuse, it's alcohol misuse, it's underage drinking, binge drinking, etc. What's often done is people jump immediately to the solution. So that we often are reactionary in our culture. We often are just like, okay, let's just jump in and let's get something done. Often what happens is things are done because they've always been done before. So in prevention, there are things that have been done over the years. So perhaps even if we don't know if they're effective, they keep getting done. And also sometimes it's just people will do things that they feel good about doing. Not necessarily that they know it's effective or not, but that's often what we are drawn to. All of that to keep in mind with that prevention gets about 5%, this primary prevention gets about 5% of federal drug demand reduction funding. Not much. We get a very, very small piece of the pie. So we have to be so very careful and laser focused on making sure that the money we're spending, that small amount of money that we are getting for primary prevention, we are spending in the most effective and efficient way. And we aren't spending it on things that we don't know are effective, or we actually know it is not effective in many cases. So, and if you haven't seen the What Does Not Work webinar or the self-paced course, I encourage you to watch that as well. All right, so that's kind of the background picture of why we are talking about risk factors today, because we want to look at how can we maximize our effectiveness. We can maximize our effectiveness by reducing risk factors and enhancing protective factors. Hopefully many of you joined me a few weeks ago with talking about protective factors and using the social development strategy. Put in the reactions if you either heart or thumbs up or something if you joined me during the protective factors training. And all right, I see some folks. Great, oh, wonderful, and in the chat too. Christine, I'm glad that you enjoyed it. Wonderful. Okay, looks like a lot of folks. If you didn't get a chance to participate in that webinar, that was recorded and available on our website, so you can go back and watch that as well. But back to how are we most effective in our prevention work? It's when we reduce risk factors and enhance protective factors both. So we're going to talk about the risk factor piece today. Watch the protective factor piece if you haven't yet. So by reducing risk factors and enhancing protective factors, we are creating and reinforcing conditions that promote healthy behaviors and lifestyles. So going back to our definition of prevention, that's that key piece. We are creating and reinforcing conditions that promote healthy behaviors and lifestyles. And that's why it's so important that we focus on reducing risk factors and enhancing protective factors. So just to make sure we're on the same page with the definition for risk factors are those things, those factors that increase the likelihood of substance misuse occurring. It's not that if these things are in somebody's life, they for sure are going to misuse substances, but they are going to increase the likelihood of substance misuse. I have a short video for you that gives a really good overview of risk factors. So let's go ahead. I'm going to switch over to that. I'm going to do this so we can do this more efficiently. All right.
If you want to prevent a health and behavior problem before it happens, you need to know about the risk factors that predict the problem. What kinds of problems? Well, if a dad asks his son to grab him a beer from the fridge, it's more likely that that boy would be drinking before it's legal age. If a girl hangs out with friends who are using marijuana, she's more likely to use marijuana later. We call those things risk factors. A risk factor is a condition that increases the likelihood of problem behaviors. Understanding risk factors is one of the key foundations of the Communities That Care process. How do we know about risk factors and where did they come from? Well, we've looked at hundreds of studies across 30 years. We've looked for consistency of risk factors in at least 2 well-documented, well-designed studies that follow young people across development. What did we learn from these hundreds of studies? Well, the first thing we learned is pretty much common sense. We learned that children are influenced by every domain they grow up in. They're influenced by the community, the school they go to, their family, and within the individual and their friends. And why is this important to Communities That Care process? Well, it's important because we know that in order to be effective, you have to look across all 4 of these domains. And you do this in order to see where these risk factors are affecting most of the kids in the community, and that's where you want to intervene. The second thing we've learned is that risk factors can be present across development, from prenatal through high school. Kids who are aggressive in 1st and 2nd grade, for example, are more likely to be violent later in life. Or kids who don't have the skills to refuse drug offers in middle school are more likely to get involved in drug use. Why is this important? Because you want to provide preventive interventions across the developmental span. The third thing we've learned is that risk factors predict multiple problems. For example, kids who have low commitment to school and don't value education, they're more likely to be involved in substance abuse, delinquency, violence, teen pregnancy, and dropping out of school. Another example is high family conflict. Now, we all have some conflict in our families, but in families where there's high levels of family conflict, those kids are at risk for a broad range of problem behaviors, including violence, delinquency, school dropout, teen pregnancy, substance abuse, and even depression and anxiety. Why is this important? Well, you get more bang for your buck when you're addressing those risk factors. You can impact not one, but many health and behavior outcomes and really change your community. The fourth thing we've learned is that risk and protective factors operate in a similar way across racial groups and regions of the country. The risk factors are related to health and behavior problems in a very similar way. For example, if you have high family conflict in a Latino urban family, that predicts health and behavior problems. Or if you're a white kid living on a farm in a rural area in a family with high levels of family conflict, that predicts health and behavior problems. So high levels of family conflict is a risk factor, whoever and wherever you are. Why is this important? It means that the science of prevention applies to your community. Now you may be thinking, the situation in my community is unique. And it is. And this is the reason that communities that care is important. It helps you understand the actual levels of risk exposure to these factors that are unique to your community. Now, before I leave the topic of risk factors, I want to talk about the other side of the coin, protective factors.
All right, and I'm going to go ahead and stop that at this point. I'm going to go switch back to our PowerPoint slides. Communities that care was mentioned several times in the video. I just wanted to point out, I meant to point out before it started, that if you use a strategic prevention framework, that is a similar framework that will help do the same thing, and you can use risk factors in the same way. So as you're watching the video, you can replace strategic prevention framework in many ways. It's not exactly the same, and I highly recommend Communities That Care if it ever interests you to look into that, but you don't have to use Communities That Care to use risk factors effectively. All right, wanted to point out, hopefully you saw in the chat that the link to to this video is in your workbook if it interests you to watch it again. All right, so let's move on then. This is also in your workbook. It's on page 7 of your workbook. This is a list of risk factors that were identified through a literature review by Drs. Hawkins and Catalano out of the Social Development Research Group at the University of Washington. I hear people often say that Hawkins and Catalano did the research to identify these things. They did not actually do the research to identify the risk factors. They did the literature review and conducted a literature review of what research had already been done and pulled that together to identify what the risk factors are. I want to point out a few things about that risk factor list. Again, Kevin mentioned this in the video, but I want to make sure that there's clear understanding with this. That inclusion on the list of this, inclusion as a risk factor on this list had to be shown in multiple studies. As Kevin talked about, at least 2 studies, but multiple studies showed it to be a risk factor. And these studies had to be longitudinal and predictive, meaning they followed a group of people, usually kids in this case, over time, and they started with kids who were not misusing substances, but they followed over time to see what was going on in their life to see whether or not they started misusing substances. So that's longitudinal, is over time, and the predictive piece is that they weren't using, but over time, there were a group of kids who started using. So what happened in their lives predicted that outcome. Now, the reason why I really want to point this out is because by having this criteria, multiple longitudinal predictive studies, it makes us feel very secure in the knowledge that the risk factors on this list truly are risk factors, that they truly do increase the likelihood of substance misuse. There are many lists of risk factors that exist. Most of them that I've seen are not as conservative in terms of making sure that the literature that they're pulling from truly have come to the conclusion that it is a risk factor. So by having this multiple longitudinal predictive criteria, we can be darn sure that if we are working on reducing these risk factors, we are going to have an impact. So be a cautious consumer. If you are using a list of risk factors already within your organization or coalition, highly recommend that you go back and look at what are the sources that are used and what criteria is used for that list of risk factors. So just a little note of warning, and also for you to be able to understand why I'm using the list that I am for this webinar. All right, so just keep in mind a few things few more things as we're going through the risk factors. Risk factors are not causal, meaning that if these risk factors are in a person's life, they will for sure use or misuse substances. They aren't that way. They're increasing the likelihood, but it's not causal relationship. Risk factors exist in multiple contexts, meaning community, family, schools, individuals, and peers. So in all of our aspects of our life. And the impact of risk factors is exponential. Typically, if you have one risk factor in your life, in a child's life, the likelihood of that having an impact is not great, with one exception that I will talk about. But there's one, typically there's not an impact. Two, you're starting to see more of an impact. Four, all of a sudden exponentially, the likelihood of substance misuse is going to start going up and up and up as you start adding in more risk factors. So the impact of the number of risk factors in a youth's life has an exponential impact. All right, couple more things to point out with this list on page 7 of your workbook. You'll see at the top that these risk factors are shared risk factors with several problem behaviors that exist for youth. So you see that at the top. And I wanted to point out then, with looking at some of these, I'm sorry, my chat up, I want to pull that down so I can see this. So for example, if you look at family management problems, you'll see that there are dots under each of those categories, meaning that the research has shown that by having family management problems, it's going to increase the likelihood of all of those problem behaviors. Then you'll see, for example, availability of drugs. Research has shown that that increases the likelihood of substance misuse as well as violence. Research has not shown it to be in those other areas. So that's how to look at this document. Okay, that leads us to our first pop quiz. We're going to pull up a poll. If you could go ahead and let's see how well I have done so far in sharing this information. Please indicate which is correct with completing the sentence risk factors. All right, we've got about 70%. Wait about 10 more seconds. And that's great. Some people are putting it in the chat. That's fine if you aren't able to do the poll. That's just fine to put it in the chat. All right, let's go ahead and share these results. All right, well done, everyone. Risk factors increase the likelihood of substance misuse. That is the correct answer is B. Very good. All right, we're going to go ahead and stop sharing and we're going to move along. Well done. And before I move on, though, I need to pace myself. Are there any questions before we move on? Feel free to put in the Q&A any questions you might have at this point. Let me know. Rebecca, I see you're unmuting. Did you see anything that I missed?
No, I think you're good.
All right, great. Okay, let's go ahead and move into the community domain risk factors. So let's take some time to explore these risk factors. The first risk factor on this list is availability of drugs. And there are a couple of things that we need to be thinking about when we're looking at the availability of drugs. One thing is that the more available drugs are, the more likely there's going to be substance misuse. No brainer, right? But what's interesting with this one is it's not only the actual availability, but also the perceived availability. So if kids perceive, they think that drugs are easily available, be it alcohol, tobacco, other drugs, there's going to be more substance misuse. So when we're thinking about our prevention efforts, yes, we want to reduce the actual availability, but also shifting the perception of availability can have an impact. And when we're talking about availability, there's two types of availability. That upper right hand picture that indicates the social availability or getting drugs from friends and family. So that's when kids are getting drugs from their friends' parents, from their own parents, from other family members, etc. That's considered social availability. Bottom right-hand corner is a photo indicating or symbolizing retail availability. So from stores or bars and those different ways in terms of retail. So thinking about with availability, we want to think about the actual availability, perceived availability, and then within those, whether it's social availability that's happening or is it retail availability that's going on. So all things to be considering as you're doing your prevention work and identifying what kind of strategies you want to implement to impact availability. All right, next on this list is community laws favorable towards drug use. So with community laws and norms, I'm not sure if I think I dropped out the and norms. That and norms piece is very important. So norms in our community impact our use rate. So if the norms in our community is, kids will be kids, they're going to, don't worry about it. It's just alcohol, or it's just cannabis, just marijuana, or whatever it might be. If that is the community norm, there's going to be increased use. Similarly, norms impact what laws we have, and laws can impact our use rate. And there's all kinds of research and literature showing the effectiveness of laws in impacting substance misuse. So for example, taxes. We see when we increase taxes on things like alcohol and tobacco, we see decreased use. Another example, 21-year-old drinking age. Once that was implemented, we saw a decrease in use and we saw a decrease in driving while intoxicated. Tobacco-free restaurants, when those laws were put into place, again, we saw a decrease in use and we also saw a decrease in secondhand smoke consequences. No surprise there, right? But so these kind of things, these laws that we can put into place absolutely impacts, I shouldn't say absolutely impacts, it can impact, depending on the law, our use. And so it's the laws and the norms together that are interacting that can have that impact on our substance misuse rate in our community. So here's an example of a community norm on display in my town. I went to the grocery store one day and saw this van sitting here. What do you think? Put in the chat. What kind of a norm do you think this is reflecting in my community? What do you think? What would this be a reflection of? Go ahead and put in the chat. Wine moms, right? Jessica, so yeah, when we're thinking about that, the wine groups, and you need wine to relax. Yes. Drink me to drive wine. This is the solution. Yeah. Oh, yep. Looking in the chat, great responses. Exactly. So as you look around your community, what kind of cues are you getting about what's socially acceptable in yours? I live in wine country. Although I work for Great Lakes region, I actually sit out in the state of Oregon. I am in the Willamette Valley in an area where there are like over 175 wineries within just my county. So wine, the community norm is, and it's very socially accepted, as drink wine to relax, drink wine to have fun, drink wine for fundraisers, drink wine, I mean, you name it, it's there. So again, exploring what is it like in your community. And I'd love to say see in the chat, go ahead and put, what do you think is a predominant community norm around substance use in your community? Go ahead and put that in the chat. And while you're doing that, I'm going to go ahead and say that social norms, so these social norms that we're just talking about, become reflected in our laws. That's what impacts what laws get passed, what laws get enforced, etc. All right, so yeah, people are putting in their Finger Lakes, yep, wine. All parents need to drink like a ranger. Interesting. Vaping is healthier than cigarettes. Oh yeah, Big Ten football pregame. Yes. You know what I'm talking about. You are spot on. Thank you for putting those in the chat. Let's turn to something a little bit different. Media portrayals of drug use. So I have here on the screen that these media portrayals increase the likelihood of subsequent substance use. So I wrote it out here because I want to say it in the correct way. So consistent evidence that youth and young adults are highly exposed to substance use portrayals, and those portrayals are associated with subsequent substance use. So we see that as the youth and young adults are exposed to media portrayals of drug use, the likelihood of them going out and using it's an increased likelihood. So research has shown this. Again, we're looking at the multiple longitudinal predictive studies, looking at that these media portrayals are increasing the likelihood of substance misuse. I have another video for you. The video is a little old. It was made in 2020, but I still think it was really well done, and I haven't found a better, more current one that's as good. So I'm going to go ahead and share this one with you. Take me a moment to get to that video. All right.
Must you really smoke?
I love it so very much.
It's shockingly effective!
That sucks.
Got an extra cigarette?
Really don't mind if you keep me sweating. I really don't mind if you blow me away. I'm trying to keep cool, but the way we're going, you're making me melt in your hot, hot flames.
Who got a cigarette there? Anyone got a cigarette at the bar?
All right. What do you think? Did some of you recognize those shows? And also, anybody surprised by how much our youth are seen in the media? I've seen some thumbs up. You're not surprised? Yep. Yeah, not surprised at all. I have to say, over the last, I'd say since like 2020 or 2019, it just seemed like there was such a dramatic increase in the amount of substance use in shows, in books, even as I'm reading books, the number of people smoking and drinking, etc., which, I'm not reading anything that I would think that would be something that would be pulled in for a real reason. So it's very interesting to see the norms around our social media, as well as other ways that are other exposure that our youth have to these things. So thinking about this can feel overwhelming. It's like, well, how can we possibly impact the media industry? Well, we might not have direct impact on that, but what are some things we could do to address this risk factor that would be in our youth lives? go ahead and put it in the chat if you have an idea of a strategy that would help reduce this risk factor. Anybody know of any, or has anybody implemented any yet? Let's see in the chat. I have some ideas. Remove use on screen. That would be ideal. That would be absolutely ideal. But if we can't reduce the use, what are some things that we could be doing? Consuming media with your children, talking about what they're seeing. Yes, media literacy skills. Absolutely. Yep. Media literacy skills are really important in this. And advocacy work in terms of trying to get not as much on screen for kids to be seen, absolutely, which I see is in there. Also, increasing protective factors. This is a piece where we may not be able to eliminate this within our youth lives, but we can increase protective factors to help buffer the impact of it. So a couple things. I love the different things that are in the chat here. Lots of different ways to think about what we can be doing to reduce the impact of this risk factor, even if we can't eliminate it. All right, well done. Gonna move on to the next risk factor. I know I'm pushing a lot of content on you all today, so hopefully you are raring to go and you're here right with me. Go ahead and give me a thumbs up or hearts or something to show, or if you're hanging in there with me. Otherwise, you could put like this the crying, like you're already doing me in. Feel free to use that. Okay, I've seen lots of thumbs up. We're hanging in there so far. Great. Okay. All right. Let's move on to the next risk factor then. Let's look at transitions and mobility. There are several things to think about with transitions and mobility. So first of all, let's talk about school transitions. So we're going to talk about school transitions and community transitions. School transitions can have an impact, increase the likelihood. These are both scheduled and unscheduled transitions. So there's the scheduled transitions of moving from elementary school to middle school and middle school to high school. Those transition years, there's an increased likelihood of substance misuse. So there's those transition years. Then there's the unscheduled transitions of those kids being pulled out of school and moved around to lots of different schools. So those kids being moved around a lot, that can increase the likelihood of substance misuse. So again, thinking about what does this mean for prevention? Obviously, those scheduled transitions, we can't eliminate those. I mean, there are the few schools in our nation that are kindergarten through 12th, right? But in most cases, we cannot eliminate those transitions. So that's when we really look at increasing the protective factors, right? Because we can't eliminate it. So we want to increase those protective factors to buffer the impact of the risk factor. Again, unscheduled transitions, if those kids are being moved around a lot, then again, what can you put into place to buffer the impact of that risk factor for those kids that are being moved around for very good reasons? It could be that their family's within the military. It could be, the employment of the parents requires that movement, et cetera. So not to place blame on anybody, but just to look at what is the impact of when that does happen. So transitions, that's transitions within schools. Let's look at transitions within communities. Transitions in communities, it could be those communities that they themselves are in transition, that there's a lot of people moving into a community, a lot of people moving out. It could be one or the other. It can also be those communities where there's a high number of commuters. That's not as I want to say popular is the wrong word, as prevalent as it used to be before the pandemic, but we definitely still see those communities where a lot of people leave for most of the day to go to work, and then they come back just for the evenings and the weekends. Again, those communities that have those high transitions, there's the increase of likelihood of substance misuse in those communities. Going hand in hand often with transitions in and mobility within the communities is low neighborhood attachment and community disorganization. So those communities that are in either great transition, a lot of people moving in, a lot of people moving out, there can be low neighborhood attachment and community disorganization. And those with a lot of commuters, people are gone a lot of the time. So their ability to become attached to a community and to be involved in creating that community organizations is limited. What we see in communities that have low neighborhood attachment and community disorganization is we see increased substance misuse. With partly with that community disorganization piece is it's difficult to promote pro-social values and norms in those communities because there is not that organization. And there's not really the it takes a village to raise a child kind of thing when there is that low attachment and community disorganization. So something I like to think about when with thinking about my own situation is I live in a small town and we live on a cul-de-sac. My boys are now 19 and 21, almost 22, the end of this week. So they're older now, but as we were growing up in this cul-de-sac, everybody knew everybody's kids. There were a lot of kids in our cul-de-sac at that point. And we really looked out for one another and we were really organized and attached to our neighborhood. So it was like, it truly was like a raising, the village raising the children kind of thing. And with being in a small town, there's lots of eyes and ears out helping parents. So for example, there was one time one of my sons was out riding his bicycle without a helmet on. And sure enough, a little bird told me, hey, saw Nathan without a helmet. So Nathan comes home and I was like, heard that you didn't have your helmet on while you're riding your bike. He's like, how did you know? How could you gotta tell me? I was like, oh, I'm not gonna tell you who told me. But I of course then had the lesson of, it's not just me with eyes and ears out, not just your dad with his eyes and ears out, it's the whole community. And having that, having a kid have that knowledge that there's all those eyes and ears out, there's going to be less likelihood of problem behaviors, including substance misuse, as well as the other problem behaviors that are mentioned on that list on page 7 of your workbook. So that's the importance of that, creating that neighborhood attachment, creating that organization within communities that really is helpful. Yeah, and I see the village that it takes to raise children has disappeared. That's what we can help create. That's as preventionists, as we are doing our work, it's what can we do to help create those communities, help create that attachment within the communities. And it has to start small. So it's not something that all of a sudden you're going to create that attachment of an entire community. It's going to be small pieces at a time.
Chris, just a quick,
Go ahead.
I was going to say, quick clarification. Someone wants to know, how is low neighborhood attached defined? Is there a way to define that term?
That is a great question. And so this isn't exactly a scientific definition, but this is the way I like to explain it. And there's the resources, the citations at the end of the PowerPoint slides that can get you to the exact definition. But the way I like to think about it is if you walk up to somebody's door and you knock on it and you say, hey, how do you like living here? One person might say, hate it, stuck here, I've got to stay here. There's no, but I'm just here. Another person knock on their door and you say, hey, how do you like living here? Another person says, love it. It's exactly where I want to be. It's because of all these reasons. So that's the informal definition of, it's kind of like that feeling, that commitment, that attachment to where you live, that's where you want to be. You're happy with it and you're engaged in that community. So hopefully that helps. All right, let's keep moving along. We have one more risk factor for the community domain, and it is extreme economic deprivation. This is a tricky one. So people often I see poverty listed on lots of lists of risk factors, but as it says on the screen here, mixed research, that there's mixed results in the research regarding extreme poverty alone being a risk factor for substance misuse. What we see in some of the research shows that those with higher income communities or families, there's actually more use because they have more money to buy the substances. So it's the extreme economic deprivation alone, I would not count on, or I would not, I wouldn't focus your attention solely on that. It's what else is going on within the family, within the community, that's going to increase the likelihood. All right, and that brings us to pop quiz number 2. Reducing, true or false, reducing the prevalence of community domain risk factors in your community can decrease the likelihood of youth substance misuse. What do you think? All right. True or false? All right, let's go ahead and end the poll and share the results. You are correct. Well done. That is true. So even when we're talking about, we often think to reduce substance misuse amongst youth, we have to work with them individually. No, we can work at this community level, reducing community risk factors that will have an impact on youth substance misuse. All right, well done, everybody. Okay, family domain risk factors. Let's jump into these. All right, first off, family history of drug use. And we have here both the environment and heredity pieces in terms of family history of drug use. So let's first look at the heredity, or the genetics piece. Research shows that 40 to 60% of a person's vulnerability is due to genetics and other biological factors. 40 to 60% of a person's vulnerability is due to genetics and other biological factors. However, keep in mind that genetics are not alone sufficient for substance use disorder to occur. So you may have a genetic predisposition, but that alone is not going to cause somebody to misuse or have the substance use disorder. It's that environment piece that has to happen along with it in order for that to happen. So with looking at the environment in terms of the family environment, I have on the left, if you're like, why did she put that picture in? It's like, what is the soil, the environment of the family? Is it toxic or nurturing in terms of the substance misuse of what's going on? So are the parents modeling substance use? Are they involving kids in their own use of, hey, go grab a beer from the fridge for me, or hey, light my cigarette? And the other piece with this is not only the parents, but the siblings. That research shows that a more powerful predictor of let me rephrase this, that having an older sibling who is misusing drugs, or actually using drugs in this case, because we're talking about kids, so using drugs, is a more powerful predictor of a younger sibling using than if their parents are using. So that role modeling impact of the older sibling using substances, it's a greater predictor than just the parents using, So when we talk about family, we're talking about both parents and the siblings. All right, another piece within the family. So looking at the family environment, family management problems. So if we're looking at how a family functions, how it's organized, how it's managed, I like to use the acronym of GMC, Guidelines, Monitoring, and Consequences. So are there guidelines that exist within that family around what is appropriate and inappropriate behavior on all kinds of things? So it could be around academics, it could be around how you are treating one another, and definitely guidelines around substance use. Monitoring, are those guidelines monitored? You could have all the guidelines in the world, but if they are monitored, then it's pretty pointless, right? It's not helpful at all. And then with consequences, a couple of things to think about with consequences. One is we don't want to have extreme consequences, because that's when we moved into the child abuse piece. So we want them to be reasonable, and we want them to be directly related to if the guidelines were followed. You know, you've monitored the guidelines and they didn't follow the guidelines, but they can be both positive or negative. So if kids did follow the guidelines, there's positive consequences to it. If they weren't followed, then there's the negative consequences that are not extreme. All right, so we need all three within our family environments, within our family systems. We need to have the guidelines, the monitoring, and the consequences. Now, I have to say, having been a parent, this is easier said than done. There are times that, you know, there's the guidelines out there, there's the monitoring, and then the consequences, you're just like, oh no, those were the guidelines. This is what I said would happen if they didn't do it. You have to make sure that you're going to be able to follow through on it, right? All those kind of things. Different things come into play when we're trying to do all three of these things of having the guidelines, monitoring, and consequences. So it's easy to say, harder to do, but so important to do within a family system. All right, family conflict. All families have conflict, or at least I don't know any that don't have conflict, but what we're talking about is an extreme level of conflict. And it's either between a conflict between the parents or caregivers or between the parents and the children. If you're looking for where domestic violence falls within this list of risk factors, it would fall within this risk factor as an extreme level of family conflict. All right. And let's go ahead and move into the last risk factor in the family domain. This is similar to that community norms piece that we talked about in the community domain, but we're talking about it within the family system, within the family level. And this is the favorable parental attitudes towards drug use. Again, it's the kids will be kids. Hey, they're going to drink anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and have them at my house, have the party at my house, and then I'll know that they're safe. It could be they're going to drink anyway, so I'm going to teach them how to drink well. Those kind of things. We know that those kind of attitudes, the kids absolutely are. It's going to be. I keep putting absolutely in the increased likelihood of substance misuse. All right. I think that was all I wanted to say with this slide. So, any questions before we move into your next pop quiz? Any questions? Rebecca, did you see anything come up?
There are several questions. One was a couple people have asked about, do these risk factors apply also to young adults or college age folks and not just youth, young folks?
That's a great question. Most of the research is going up to age 18, that Hawkins and Catalano's list. There are, I included in your workbook some links to some other lists of risk factors. For example, for older adults, there's some research that exists for that. So most of these, the research was done through about age 18. Sometimes they went a little older. So that doesn't mean that these risk factors aren't risk factors for those older ages, but not necessarily the research done to for sure show that.
Another quick question was, do these risk factors still apply to opioid use disorder that is predicted by a prescription opioid? We know this drove the epidemic in the past, and wondering if the risk factors then changed for youth.
I didn't quite follow that. Is that in the Q&A?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, for some reason,
From Jessica.
I just love, whoops, yep, I tried to get to it's not letting me pull up the Q&A. I don't know why Zoom won't let me right now. Can you say it one more time, Rebecca?
Sure. Do these risk factors still apply to opioid use disorder that is predicted by a prescription opioid?
Okay. Yeah, when this research was done, most of the research was done prior to the opioid epidemic. So I would say that it was not done specific for opioid misuse. However, what I will say is when we're looking at these risk factors, they are the risk factors that are going to increase the likelihood that kids are wanting to use substances or misuse substances, all substances. So this is where we often in substance misuse prevention get pulled in different directions of kind of the drug of the day, which, you know, not to say that glibly, but it's like the problem, where the problem lies in the drug that's being most used, or, you know, kind of the next spike. And we don't want to get pulled off into those directions of addressing those individual drugs that are being used. What we want to do as primary preventionists is we want to reduce the likelihood that kids are going to seek out those drugs. So by reducing these risk factors, the likelihood is going to be that we are going to reduce kids wanting to seek out these drugs. Opioid overdose epidemic, in terms of the, if the one pill can kill, that kind of looking at that aspect, that's a little bit different. So I would say this, we'd have to, I wouldn't say this applies directly to that piece. So hopefully, I'm not sure how clear that was. Hopefully that was clear enough. Go ahead, Rebecca.
Couple of questions that have to do with parents. One is, how do we get them to buy into prevention? And are there any specific studies that show that attitude of kids are safer at my house is not a good option? And parents often say that their kids call if they've been drinking so that they don't drive. And with that understanding, all these things are these parents don't seem to be buying into the prevention piece. And what do we know is there science behind a response to those questions?
Okay, great. And Zoom just very politely and now gave me access to the Q&A. Not sure why, but so I can see them now. So how do we get parents to buy into prevention? That's a whole community readiness piece. And I would encourage you to look at SPIF step 2 at community readiness, and really work on nurturing that. And there's different strategies to, you know, enhance the readiness of our parents and larger community for prevention. And then with that second, is there any study done where the thought of kids are safer at my house that makes that thinking more or less popular in rural communities? I'm not sure about that piece with the rural communities. I have not looked for that, so I don't know if that exists. And then parents often say that they want their kids to call if they drink so they won't drive. Does this also increase risk? I would say that no, but again, it's how that message is delivered. If it's the message of, hey, I know you're going to drink anyway, so call me when you need a ride, that would increase the likelihood. If it is the message of, I want you to be safe, if you get into a situation where you feel like you are going to be in danger, call me and no questions asked. That kind of thing would not increase the likelihood, you know, specifically around substance misuse. And with that, I am going to go ahead and stop. There's more questions. And if there are questions I don't get to during this session, I will make sure to get those answered in the follow-up email. But I want to make sure to keep, make sure we cover everything. So let's go ahead and move to pop quiz number 3, another true or false. Ready? Here comes the poll, the quiz. Divorce is an example of a risk factor in the family domain. True or false? All right. Going to go back 10 more seconds. All right, let's go ahead and end the poll and share the results. The correct answer is false. I didn't say divorce anywhere in there, did I? I realize this is a bit of a trick question, but that's where we often add things to this list of risk factors just from what we think should be there, but it's not listed in that list of risk factors. And I'm going to talk more about what things are not risk factors and why shortly. So keep this in mind as we move forward. All right, but before we do that, I'm throwing a lot at you, and I know with the way that we can retain things in our brain, we need a little bit of a brain break. So I'm going to turn off my camera. You all are not on a camera, so I encourage you to follow along with this goofy video to take a break so that your brain is ready for the next two categories of the risk factors. Okay, ready? I want you to follow along.
Yeah! Work it. Let me see you move something. Work it. Come on. Let me see you
Get up, get down, everybody move your body. Let me see you shake that body. Come on and work that body. Drop it like a top. Get up, get down, everybody move your body.
Let me see you
Get up, get down, everybody move your body. Let me see you shake that body. Come on and work that body. Drop it like a top. Get up, get down, everybody move your body. Let me see you shake that body. Come on and work that body. Let me see you shake that body. Come on and work that body.
Let me see you
Get up, get down, everybody move your body. Let me see you shake that body. Come on and work that body. Drop it like a top. Get up, get down, everybody move your body. Let me see you shake that body. Come on and
All right, who followed along? Give me a reaction in the chat there, or in the chat, or the reactions. All right, I see some laughing faces. Hopefully didn't that feel good? I definitely moved around. It sure feels good to move around while we're sitting here on Zoom, isn't it? All right, yeah. Oh, good, you needed that. I love that. Thank you for following along, and hopefully, if you are in a cubicle land like they were, hopefully nobody gave you too many side glances of what are you doing. All right, we ready to go? Let's do it. All right, school domain risk factors. First risk factor in this section is academic failure beginning in late elementary school. So there's some really important things to understand with this one. What we see through research, let's see. For some reason, polls are popping up on my screen. So what research is showing is that those kids who are falling behind for any reason, grades 4 through 6 or later, that's when this risk factor comes into play. What we see is once they hit 4th to 6th grade, and again, failing for any reason, that label of failure seems to get stuck in their minds. That's I'm never going to be good at school. This is not my thing. I'm not smart enough to do it, or whatever it might be, that label of failure gets stuck. So the time to address this is before grade 4. So if we can address problems of kids they're struggling for whatever reason, if we can do that before grade 4, that's when we will reduce the impact of this risk factor, that it won't have an impact. So if we are going to implement prevention programs to address academic failure, ideally, we will want to do it before grade 4. Lack of commitment to school. This is another risk factor. If we're seeing increases the likelihood of substance misuse. When we're thinking about lack of commitment to school, a couple things to keep in mind, that these are the kids who don't have goals about academia, that they're just like, killing time, sitting through their classes, don't really have any interest, aren't focused on thinking that they're going to move ahead in college, but not that even that piece, because it's more that they really don't want to be there. They aren't that commitment to school, that they aren't committed to doing well in school, all of those kinds of things. Not only with classes, though, what we see is that there's an inverse relationship between time spent on school activities and drug use. So the more school activities they're involved in, both during the school day as well as after school hours, or in some cases before school, the more involved they are in school activities, the less drug use. So the inverse relationship: more involved, the less likelihood of use. So creating that commitment to school is really important. And we're already back at our next pop quiz. Boy, that went fast, right? Compared to some of the other sections. All right, here we go. Next pop quiz. An ideal time to address the risk factor of academic failure is. What do you think? Got 10 more seconds. All right, let's go ahead and end the poll and share the results. All right, 52% of you got it right. Grade 3 or earlier. So again, we're talking about an ideal time. Not that we want to give up on kids after grade 4, but an ideal time if we want to reduce the impact of this risk factor is grade 3 or earlier. Because once they hit fourth or sixth grade, that's when that label of failure gets stuck. All right, well done, folks. And last domain, here we go, individual and peer domain risk factors. And actually, before I jump into that, I forgot to pause for any questions, Rebecca. Oh, here we go. It did let me pull it up this time.
Good, good. So you can see there are a few.
Okay, great. Is there one that you think I should start with?
Let's say, how do you help fourth grade not compare themselves to other kids in their class or the smart kids?
Help fourth graders not compare themselves.
I think that's supposed to say other kids, not
Okay,
Potter kids.
thank you to other kids in their class. To be honest, that's out of my scope of knowledge. I bet there's a lot of people out there who have that knowledge. I don't have the specific knowledge around that area. I'm sorry. What about students that are looking at technical trades as opposed to college? That's where I stop myself. You're exactly right, Rebecca, that it's academic focus can be academic in terms of learning these new things. I'm not saying this well. So if they're looking at the technical trades, technical school or the trade schools, they typically are still focused on that learning aspect of the classroom environment in some way. So they typically, I shouldn't say typically, but there can still be the commitment to school if they are looking to move on, move into the trades or a technical school. Hopefully I said that better this time. All right, and somebody says, I'm an assistant prevention educator and present life skills training in grades 4 through 6, help with self-esteem and decisions making. Decision making absolutely is going to be important. And as we're going to talk about favorable attitudes here in just a moment. All right, and I think the others, yep, I'm going to go ahead and either touch on soon or we'll address later. Rebecca, was there anything else that you saw that I should address at the moment?
I think we're good for now.
Okay, thanks. All right, let's move into individual peer domain risk factors. First one, early and persistent antisocial behavior. Couple different things. So this is the early antisocial behavior. This is interesting. It's specific to boys in kindergarten through third grade. So the girls were studied as well, but they didn't see this impact with the girls. They just saw it with the boys. These are the boys in kindergarten through third grade who are exhibiting antisocial behavior in ways, for example, of they might be very shy and withdrawn and then explode in anger. So again, it's not the releasing of anger and frustration in effective ways, in more antisocial ways. So that's the early part of the early antisocial behavior. Persistent, and the research showed it's both boys and girls. And when we talk about persistent antisocial behavior, it's the things like truancy, shoplifting, fighting, etc., as I have here on the screen. So when we're looking at this risk factor, 2 parts to that. Oops, how did we go backwards? Well, isn't that interesting? I have no idea. I'm still clicked my mouse and it just went in a different way. All right, alienation and rebelliousness. This one is those youth who don't feel connected to society. They value nonconformity, so they value that rebelliousness, are looking for ways to exhibit that rebelliousness. And they often don't see a place for themselves in society, in the larger society. So that's where they feel alienated from the majority culture within their community, and they're looking to rebel against it. So probably not too much of a surprise for this one. Gang involvement, again, this is probably not a surprise to anybody, but if youth are involved in a gang, they're going to be more likely to use alcohol and other drugs, as well as I have here to engage in delinquent or violent behavior if they're involved with gangs. All right, next one, peers who use. Do you remember back long ago at the start of this webinar when I talked about the exponential impact of risk factors, that if there's just one or two risk factors in a kid's life, the likelihood of it having an impact is not great, but once you get up to 4, 5, 6, we see that exponential impact. The one exception is peers who use. What we see is if just this risk factor is in a kid's life, they are going to be more likely to use substances. This one is one of the strongest predictors of substance misuse. However, it's still not a given. So still we look at what's going on in the rest of their lives. What's going on with the protective factors? Are there a lot of protective factors around? What kind of messages are being sent through the family, through the community, et cetera? So still not a given, but it's a powerful risk factor. Favorable attitudes towards drug use. So what we know through our research on theories is that a shift in attitude precedes a shift in behavior. So in our mind, our attitude has to change about something before we actually have that behavior happen. So let me give you an example. So if we're looking at kids in elementary school versus middle school versus high school, and we go into an elementary school and we say, hey, what do you think about doing drugs? They often, the results are, ooh, gross, yuck, I would never do it. And if my friends did it, they wouldn't be my friends, that kind of thing. And the level of use within elementary schools, luckily, is not significant. So we see those attitudes have that impact around behavior. But then when we move into middle schools, we say, well, what do you think about doing drugs? You can start getting more messages or responses of, well, I know so-and-so and they smoked pot and they're okay, or they drank and they're okay. And I don't know that it's that bad, kind of thing. We start seeing an increase in use in those middle school years. And then high school, what do you think about, doing drugs? Like, no big deal. Again, we see an increase in use. So these favorable attitudes, if we can keep the, as much as we can, the ooh, yuck, gross kind of attitude, or the, friends, if my friends do it, they won't be my friends. That's going to help decrease the likelihood of the behavior happening. All right, early initiation of drug use. So with this one, those youth who drink before age 15, so those youth who drink before age 15 compared to those who wait until after age 19 are twice as likely to use drugs. So I'll say that one more time. Those who drink before age 15 compared to those who wait until after age 19 will be twice as likely to misuse drugs. So if we can just delay that, I realize that can feel like quite a few years from 15 to 19, but if we can just delay that up to 19, that's going to have a significant impact in terms of a preventive effect. So why do I have 2 sheep on this slide? Why would I put 2 sheep? Put in the chat. What do you think? A little quick test here. What do these sheep represent? Think of the number. I like peer pressure, but around this initiation of drug use. So Felicia's getting closer. We have the 15. Oh, do you think too cheap? All right. I went way too far off with this. Okay. It's let's see. I was thinking somebody got it. So this is the twice as likely. So I put 2 for twice as likely. So if they wait for so those who drink before age 15 compared to those who wait until after 19 are twice as likely. So that was the 2. Yeah, I was too far off, wasn't I? Sorry. Took you too far off. All right. So constitutional factors. This is the last risk factor we're going to talk about, and it's within the individual and peer domain. So these are the things that are going on within our biology, within our own bodies. So things like brain trauma can increase the likelihood of substance misuse. Brain trauma due to accidents, due to mother's prenatal use, low basal rate, things like that. So these are things going on within the biology of our own bodies. Now, often, again, we can help prevent brain trauma in some cases, like wearing helmets, things like that. But in other cases, we can't necessarily impact the biology of what's going on. So again, what can we do to help mitigate the impact of this risk factor? Put it in the chat. What can we be doing? Couple of things we can be doing. What can we do to help with this risk factor if we can't change somebody's biology? And I'm thinking in our prevention role, I should have been specific. Primary prevention role. There we go. I was looking for Mandy. I was looking for increased protective factors. Yes, several of you. Increased protective factors. And decrease the other risk factors that this person is exposed to, or this group of folks are exposed to. So by decreasing the other risk factors and increasing protective factors for those folks who have these constitutional factors, that will help decrease the likelihood of substance misuse. Well done. I see a lot of folks in here putting those things in the chat. All right, pop quiz number 5, last pop quiz. We're going to go ahead and pull up a poll. There we go. The risk factor that is the strongest predictor of youth substance misuse is... All right, we'll do about 10 more seconds. All right, let's go ahead and end the poll and share the results. Well done. The correct answer is friends who use drugs. So that is the one that we found through the research that is the strongest predictor of substance misuse among youth. So we'll go ahead and stop sharing. All right. So with that, I want to make sure, just briefly say that there are a few things that we know through research are not risk factors. One is boredom. I often hear communities doing their prevention planning work saying, well, kids are just bored, so that's why they use substances. It's not the boredom that's leading them to using substances. It's what else is going on. So are they bored and the friends who are using, and there's high availability, and the community norms are around using? It's what else is going on within the environment that happens. Yeah, you can be bored and you can go out and you could do something very productive and creative and different things if you don't have those other risk factors pushing you in that direction. So boredom is not a risk factor. Divorce is not a risk factor, and I alluded to this earlier. What they found through research is that divorce in and of itself does not increase the likelihood. It's what else is going on within the family unit, and perhaps broader, that of whether or not the divorce can have an impact. So for example, if there was an extreme level of conflict within the family, we know that's a risk factor, right? If after divorce, that extreme level of conflict is decreased, then the divorce actually is going to decrease the number of risk factors that are in that child's life. Family management problems, if there was the extreme consequences where there's child abuse, if that's decreased, then again, the divorce can be a good thing in a child's life in terms of decreasing their risk. So divorce in and of itself is not a risk factor. Low self-esteem is also not a risk factor. What we've found through research, again, the research done on programs designed to raise self-esteem, that when they implemented those programs, they did not show a preventive effect for substance misuse. So by increasing a kid's self-esteem, that did not show a decreased likelihood of substance misuse. Often with people who are using substances, they often have very high self-esteem. That's, again, shown through research. So self-esteem, although we want kids to have good self-esteem, that's a lofty goal and it's a good goal. But if we're looking for it to be a preventive effect for substance misuse, it's not there. All right, so what do we do with this information? I've thrown a lot at you. I know there's a lot there. That's why I have the workbook, so you can refer back to it. Hopefully you all have taken notes. Feel free to watch the recording if you want a refresher. But what can we do? So we want to reduce risk factors. We want to increase protective factors to maximize our effectiveness of our small amount of primary prevention dollars that we get. We can use risk factors, or we do use risk factors within the strategic prevention framework. We do it when we're looking at conducting our assessment. We do it when we're doing our planning in terms of selecting the strategies that we are needing to implement within our communities. We do it with our implementation, that we're working to reduce risk factors. And of course, we're looking at risk factors in our evaluation of, did we have the impact that we wanted to have? Did we reduce risk factors? So that's one way that we take action with these risk factors, is through our work on the strategic prevention framework. We take action at the appropriate developmental stages. So we want to look at what risk factors are in a toddler, or in this case, an infant's environment. I guess the toddler may be the bottom left. What risk factors could be present in this girl's life in the middle? And what about with the older youth on the right? We look at what risk factors would be prevalent in each of these developmental stages and work to reduce the risk factors and increase protective factors at each developmental stage. We, as preventionists, we need to work with others within our community who are also working in these areas to address multiple risk factors with multiple strategies, again, while increasing protective factors. Addressing one risk factor within a community with one strategy is probably not going to have a significant effect. It will have some impact, but it's not going to have a larger community-wide impact. But if we can start looking at what else is going on and really piecing together these efforts in a strategic way, then we're going to see much more impact, broader impact across our community. If you are looking for what programs, strategies have been shown to be effective at reducing risk factors, I highly encourage you to go to this document by the Pacific Southwest PTTC. And again, there's a link in your workbook to this. This is the Guide to Online Registries for Substance Misuse Prevention, Evidence-Based Programs and Practices. And you can go to these online registries, and in some cases, you can actually select the risk factor, and then you'll get a list of programs and strategies that have been shown to be effective at addressing that risk factor. So if you haven't done that already, I highly encourage you to explore those registries and see what you can learn and what you can glean from how to address risk factors within your community. All right, so a few possible next steps. Most people, well, I should say, again, so looking at research, within an hour after this webinar, you will lose 50% of what I've shared with you in terms of the content, unless you take action, and take action soon, to reinforce that knowledge within your brain. So I highly encourage you to think about what possible next steps you can take within the next 24 hours. Here are some ideas for you. A water cooler chat, be it virtual or in person. Share what you learned about through this webinar with a colleague, or it could be with a family member, a friend. By sharing that information, that's going to reinforce your learning in your brain. Examine the risk factors list used by your organization. Find out if it's research-based, what criteria was used. Identify what priority risk factors if you already conducted a needs assessment, what was identified in your needs assessment, and then look to see whether or not the strategies you're implemented are actually addressing those priority risk factors. Oh, and that was the next one. I lumped it all into one. I'd love for you to do both of those together. All right, watch a recording of the Protective Factors webinar if you didn't already see it. Could be another action to take. And finally, explore the evidence-based registry that I just mentioned. Those are some ideas. They're in your workbook. I would love it if you could go to this link that's put in the chat, this commitment to action, and let me know what you're committing to do within the next 24 hours. And if you want, you can put your name and email address on there, and I will follow up with you within 24 hours to see how it went. So go ahead and take a moment to fill out that commitment form if you're so willing. And I see the question of how do you access the Protective Factors webinar? There's a link in your workbook, and we will also include that in the follow-up email. All right, so a few more things before we end. And again, the workbook is on the product page on our website. That's linked to the product page, and we will put that link in the follow-up email if you haven't accessed it yet. Few closing thoughts. Upcoming events. Really hope you'll join us for some more events. It would be great to have you here for some things that we have coming up. First of all, if you've already taken the Foundations in Prevention Ethics course, we'd love for you to join us with our deep dive into our Prevention Code of Ethics. The December one, we're going to look at fidelity and adaptation. December 10th, we have Brian Klaas from Johns Hopkins School of Public Health is going to join us again. You all asked for him to come back and do a longer training, so we have him back. He's fantastic. If you haven't attended his training, highly recommend it. And if you have attended it before, highly recommend you take it again. Every time I watch him, I glean so much. On December 17th, we have Sarah Cerna is going to present Navigating Difficult Conversations, Making the Case for Equity and Substance Misuse Prevention. This is a limited number of slots that we have for this, so if you're interested in this, I would recommend signing up right away. Virtual SAPS. This is just for Region 5 only. I have the states listed there. We have about 10 more slots left, so not too many left. If you want to apply, I would do it soon. And more, there's much, much more. All right, using cultural humility to reshape your prevention coalition with Albert Gay is going to be on January 14th. If you've seen Albert present before, he's fantastic. Learning Collaborative for Prevention Certification. If you are looking to become and actively working on becoming a certified prevention specialist, and you live in or work in Region 5, encourage you to explore what this is all about and apply if you're interested. Another deep dive into prevention ethics on February 13th. This time we're going to look at ethic advocacy for prevention. I don't have that written right on there. Region 5, we are going to hold a virtual prevention core competencies course in February. And last but not least, prevention supervisors. If you are somebody who supervises preventionists, we have a training with Nicole Augustine coming up on March 11th and 13th that I highly recommend. All right, looking for more information on risk and protective factors, go to our prevention portal. Click on this link that says risk and protective factors. You will get to this page that has sections on what is it, learn about it, and take action. And I should have pointed out that there's lots of different topics on our learning portal. So I encourage you to go and poke around in there and see what's helpful for you to learn about these different topics. If you haven't already, I'd encourage you to like and follow us. We post daily the most recent information that we have and information that we hope you will find helpful in your work in primary prevention. And just a reminder, complete your evaluation form. Once we close out this webinar, you will be redirected to a page that has our GIPRA evaluation form. I read every single comment that's written and use that to help inform our future trainings. Also, we use it to report back to our funder. So I'd really appreciate it if you completed it. With that, a huge thank you to Rebecca and Jen who are on the back end today for me, and Rebecca who did all the prep work for us to get this event set up, and she does all the end work for us. So a huge thank you to Rebecca, and a huge thank you to you all for your active participation in this webinar today. It was great to be on here with you. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care, everyone.